Chapter 1. The low hum was the first thing Elias registered each morning, a deep, resonant vibration that permeated the very structure of the Odyssey. It wasn't an unpleasant sound, not anymore. It was simply there, a constant, like the low thrum of his own heartbeat, a mechanical pulse that had become a part of him. The artificial dawn painted his small sleeping quarters in shades of pale orange, a feeble attempt to mimic the natural rhythm of a day he hadn't seen in years. The room was barely large enough for his bunk, a small storage locker, and the utilitarian control panel embedded in the wall. There was no adornment, no personal touch, just the bare necessities of life on a starship. He sat up slowly, the synthetic fabric of his sleepwear rustling softly in the confined space. His body felt stiff, the consequence of another day spent hunched over machinery. He moved with a practiced economy, his actions dictated by years of repetition. A small tube of nutrient paste emerged from the dispenser with a soft hiss, its bland, beige contents the same as every other morning. He ate it methodically, staring at the blank wall, his mind a vast, empty space. There were other workers in the common area, all as tired and worn as he was, their eyes fixed on their own bland meals, their conversations muted. Elias avoided eye contact, preferring the quiet company of his own thoughts, or rather, the lack of them. He rose and made his way out into the dimly lit corridors of the lower engineering sectors. The metal walls vibrated around him, the constant hum of the ship amplified in the narrow passageways. Pipes snaked across the ceiling, carrying fluids and gases to and from the ship's heart. The symphony of the ship was a familiar one, the clang of metal on metal, the hiss of compressed air, the whirring of machinery. He passed other workers, their faces drawn and tired, their movements mirroring his own. A nod was the only acknowledgement, a silent understanding of shared exhaustion. Sector Gamma 7 was his destination, the location of his workshop. The door hissed open as he approached, revealing a cluttered space filled with tools, machinery components, and diagnostic equipment. The viewport, usually covered in a layer of grime and dust, was currently offering a glimpse of the star-filled void. The viewport was high enough that all you could see were the small pinpricks of distant suns, their light weak and diffused by the distance. It was a view he rarely looked at, preferring the intricate workings of the machines he spent his life with. Crew Chief Rylan was already there, his massive frame filling the small office space adjacent to the workshop. Rylan was a man of few words, his interactions with the crew brief and functional. He handed Elias a datapad, the screen displaying a list of tasks and system diagnostics. Hyperdrive couplings, Sector 4, routine check. His voice was a low growl, devoid of emotion. Elias simply nodded, accepting the assignment. There was a strange comfort in Ryland's predictability, a steady presence in the chaotic rhythm of ship life. He immersed himself in the work, his focus narrowing to the intricate details of the hyperdrive couplings. The rhythmic hum of the ship faded into the background, replaced by the subtle sounds of the machinery. His hands moved with practiced precision, each movement precise and efficient. He checked the alignment of the conduits, ran diagnostics on the power regulators, and adjusted the flow rates. Time seemed to lose all meaning, the iors blurring together into a continuous cycle of maintenance and repair. A short break, more nutrient-paced, consumed in silence, his gaze fixed on the datapad, although no new directives had come. He continued his work, losing all sense of time, the only reality the mechanical intricacies of the couplings. He felt like an extension of the ship's system, a cog in a machine much larger than himself. Chapter 2. Echoes of the past. The flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the grimy floor of Maintenance Bay Gamma 7. It was a forgotten corner of the Odyssey, tucked away in the bowels of the lower engine sector, a place where dust motes danced undisturbed in the stale air. The metallic tang of ozone and the cloying scent of old lubricant hung heavy, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the more frequented corridors. Elias, his face smudged with grime, surveyed the scene with a sigh. His supervisor, a man whose face was as wrinkled as his coveralls, had assigned him this task, cataloging and cleaning the antiquated equipment gathering dust in this forgotten bay. It was busy work, a way to keep him occupied, no doubt, while the real technicians attended to the critical systems. He dragged a heavy, dented crate into the center of the bay, the metal screeching against the floor. He knew this was the type of work that would take most of the day, which normally wouldn't be an issue, but today it just felt pointless. There was a rhythm to the ship's machinery, a constant hum that usually soothed him, but even that was grating today. He began to pull off sheets of plastic that covered old machinery, revealing tools and instruments that looked as though they belonged in a museum. He ran a gloved hand over the top of an old plasma torch. The metal was cold and coated in a layer of gray dust. While moving a pile of rusted piping, he noticed something out of place. A section of the wall paneling was loose, almost as if it had been pried open. His usual apathy was momentarily broken by a flicker of curiosity. He squeezed his hand behind the panel, his fingers brushing against something small and rectangular. He pulled it free, revealing a corroded data cache, its once smooth surface now pitted and stained. He turned it over in his hand. It was heavy for its size. He scanned the bay, spotting a battered console tucked away in a corner. It looked as old as the equipment surrounding him, but there was a chance it might still function. He walked over and brushed off some of the grime before connecting the data cache. He pressed the power button. The console sputtered to life, the screen flickering with fragmented data. After a moment, a menu appeared. It was simple, just a list of numbered audio files. Elias selected one at random. His curiosity piqued. The static crackled in his ears before a voice emerged, clear and jovial. Log entry 17, Captain Eva Rostova speaking. We're approaching the Kepler 186F system. Morale is high and the crew is excited about the prospects. Elias was taken aback. It was a voice from a different time, a different Odyssey. He listened as the log continued. Captain Rostova spoke of the crew's excitement about what they may find on the planet. As he continued down the list, the logs were filled with laughter, stories of ship-wide parties, and snippets of conversations that seemed ordinary, yet were now charged with a distant, almost melancholic resonance. In another log, someone was giving a slightly drunken and overly sentimental account of what life was like on Earth. Elias scrolled through the logs, drawn to the voices that echoed from the past. They spoke of hope, exploration, a naive belief in a bright future. A stark contrast to the reality of their present situation. As he played one of the logs, he heard someone start singing, a catchy but slightly old tune that was strangely familiar. As the melody played, a fragmented image flashed across his mind, a woman's face, her eyes full of laughter, a flash of a memory that seemed both vivid and elusive. He pressed his gloved hand to his forehead, trying to recall more, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The feeling was fleeting, replaced by a pang of longing. The last audio log faded, the screen returning to the static menu. Elias sat there, the silence in the bay suddenly heavy. The echoes of the past lingered, contrasting sharply with his own stagnant present. The hum of the engine, which usually offered a strange comfort, now seemed like a constant, mournful dirge. The voices of the past, with their naive hope, were a bitter reminder of all that was lost. He felt like an artifact in this forgotten place. He disconnected the data cache from the console and slipped it into his pocket. He had more than enough work to do, but that could wait. He stood and looked at his reflection in the side of the console's screen. His face was tired. As he began to walk from the bay, his mind was replaying fragments of the audio logs, a discordant symphony that echoed his own personal grief. He was a mechanic of a massive ship, a part of a grand project, but also utterly alone. He stepped out of the bay into the corridor, the dim lighting doing little to lift the heaviness in his heart. The routine duties, the cold machinery, the endless corridors, all felt heavier than before. Chapter 3. A Malfunction's Dance, the rhythmic hum of the Odyssey. A sound Elias had come to both rely upon and resent, abruptly fractured. It wasn't a subtle shift, a mere variation in tone, but a violent tearing, the smooth drone replaced by a guttural roar that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. The deck plates beneath his worn boots trembled, not with the usual gentle thrum of the hyperdrive, but with an erratic, jarring pulse. Red lights, usually dormant, blinked into life on the diagnostics console before him, each a tiny scream of alarm. The klaxon, a harsh, intrusive siren that pierced the ship's normally sedate atmosphere, began its incessant wail. Elias, who had been methodically checking coupling calibrations, paused, his hand still resting on a wrench. The sudden shift was like a cold hand gripping his heart. His eyes darted to the console, the smooth, ordered numbers and graphs replaced with angry, flashing error codes. Multiple systems were screaming for attention, but the primary fault was glaring, impossible to ignore the main hyperdrive coupling. A critical failure. His mind, usually sluggish, sharpened to a point. This wasn't a scheduled maintenance hiccup. This was a full-blown emergency. He dropped the wrench, the metallic clang swallowed by the growing roar of the troubled engine. He felt the familiar, leaden weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, a burden he usually managed to ignore. A sharp, insistent voice crackled through the comm system. Engineering team, report to coupling bay immediate. Repeat, coupling bay immediate. It was a command, not a request, and Elias moved with a speed that belied his usual detached demeanor. The normally leisurely pace of the lower engine sectors had transformed into a chaotic ballet of rushing feet and shouted instructions. Crew members, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination, scrambled towards the affected area. Elias pushed through the throng, his body moving on autopilot, his mind already dissecting the problem. Years of ingrained routine kicked in, pushing aside the ever-present apathy. He was a mechanic, and this was what mechanics did. Reaching the coupling bay, he found a scene of controlled panic. Sparks showered from damaged conduits, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt metal. The central coupling, a vast network of interlocking gears and conduits, was bucking violently, groaning under the strain. The usual precise movements of the machinery were replaced by uncontrolled spasms. His team, a motley collection of men and women he barely acknowledged on a regular basis, waited for his direction. For a moment he felt a flicker of something akin to command, a feeling he hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. Alvarez, secure the secondary cooling lines. Ramirez, power distribution diagnostics. Chen, I need a full breakdown of the energy feedback levels, he barked, his voice sharp and clear, surprising even himself. The team responded instantly, their initial panic replaced with a focused, almost rhythmic efficiency. Elias moved through the bay, his hands tracing the lines of the damaged coupling, his mind processing the complex interplay of forces. He was a surgeon, the ship his patient, and he had to find the source of the bleed. The repair process was a precise dance, a series of small, deliberate movements that together would restore the ship's stability. He barked instructions, his movements economical, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he adjusted regulators, rerouted power, and replace damaged conduits. The rhythmic hiss of welders, the clanging of metal on metal, filled the air. He worked alongside his team, no longer just observing but an integral part of the solution. Time seemed to blur, the minutes stretching into an eternity of concentrated effort. He was no longer Elias, the listless mechanic, but a cog in a larger machine, working to keep everything turning. Finally, after what felt like an age, the violent tremors began to subside. The groaning of the coupling softened, the erratic flashing of the error lights on the console slowed, and then stopped. The terrifying roar of the engines diminished, settling back into the familiar, reassuring hum that had been his constant companion for so long. He took a deep breath, the air still thick with the scent of burnt metal, but now devoid of the overwhelming urgency of the last hour. A strange feeling, almost akin to satisfaction, bloomed briefly within him, then faded as quickly as it had arrived, leaving in its wake a familiar emptiness. It was done. The machine was fixed. He wiped grease from his brow with the back of his hand, looking around at the team, their faces still tight with the lingering tension of the malfunction. He saw the relief in their eyes, the way they moved with a different energy than just an hour ago. He knew they would feel this, the effect of the near disaster. He looked at them and recognized that he did not. He simply did not feel. He turned and walked back to his station. He picked up the wrench he had dropped, the cool metal a familiar weight in his hand. The ship hummed around him, the monotonous rhythm a balm and an irritant. He continued his work, checking the coupling calibrations, the fleeting feeling of purpose and meaning gone, leaving him once again with the monotonous routine, the hum, and the emptiness. The machine worked again. He was a machine, and the machine worked again. Chapter 4. The Labyrinth of Levels. The maintenance request crackled to life on Elias's wrist console, a brief, impersonal summons that cut through the monotonous hum of the engine room. Hydroponics, Level 7, Nutrient Dispersal System Malfunction. It was an unusual assignment. His expertise lay in the ship's core mechanics, not its botanical appendices. A sigh, barely audible above the omnipresent drone of the engines, escaped his lips. He detached his magnetic boots from the gridded floor and began his ascent. The engineering sector, his usual haunt, was a study in functional austerity. Dim, amber lights cast long shadows over the exposed conduits and hulking machinery. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of lubricants and the low thrum of power regulators. Elias moved through the labyrinthine corridors with a practiced ease, his steps echoing softly against the metal bulkheads. The transport shafts, vertical arteries of the ship, were his first departure from the familiar. He entered the nearest, the platform shuddering slightly as it began its slow ascent. Each level was a distinct world. Level 6 was a transitional space, a blend of industrial grit and burgeoning public areas. The lighting shifted, becoming brighter, more diffuse. He glimpsed a trio of children chasing iridescent butterflies, their genetically engineered wings catching the light as they flitted about. Their laughter, a brief, melodic counterpoint to the engine's low thrum, faded quickly as he ascended further. Level 5 opened onto a wider thoroughfare, lined with small shops and kiosks. Couples strolled hand in hand, their faces turned towards each other in conversation, or sometimes simply sharing a silent intimacy that made Elias's chest ache with a loneliness he could not name. He continued, walking with his head down, hoping to not be observed or worse, acknowledged. Level 4 and Level 3 were less crowded, more sedate. Here, he saw elderly figures huddled around holographic projections of Earth, their faces a mixture of longing and wistful melancholy. The blues and greens of a world they had never known, a world he only knew from old recordings, swirled before them, a testament to a past that felt both impossibly distant and etchingly real. He caught a woman staring at the ocean, tears streaming down her face, though no sound accompanied them. The image was so profound that he paused for a moment, observing. She didn't notice him, nor did she seem to notice the world around her. It was as if she had found herself, completely, in the blue hues of a distant and forgotten planet. He moved on. Finally, the transport shaft deposited him on level 7, the hydroponics sector. The air here was warmer, humid, and thick with the sweet, earthy scent of growing plants. Rows of hydroponic gardens stretched out before him, bathed in the soft glow of artificial suns. The area was a lush contrast to the starkness of the engine room, a living, breathing testament to the ship's self-sufficiency. He located the malfunctioning system quickly, a simple valve misaligned, causing an imbalance in the nutrient flow. He worked methodically, his fingers deft and precise, his mind focused on the task at hand. The repair was completed quickly and without fuss. He felt no satisfaction in the completion of the repair. It was simply something that needed to be done. As he prepared to return to his sector, Elias paused, observing the hydroponic staff. They moved with a purpose, their hands gently tending to the plants, their faces etched with a quiet dedication. There was a palpable sense of connection here, a shared sense of purpose that resonated within this space of growth and life. Elias stood, a solitary figure on the edge of the vibrant garden, the hum of his engineering boots against the tiled floor the only sound that seemed to be connected to him. He was a part, an observer of a life he could never be a part of. He felt that more keenly than ever. He turned and stepped back onto the transport shaft. The descent was silent, save for the rhythmic whir of the machinery. Level by level, the lights dimmed, the atmosphere thinned, the background noises became more mechanical. He moved automatically, as he did every day, back towards his engine room, his lower levels. Chapter 5. A ghost in the machine. The low hum of the engine core was a distant lullaby here in the secondary maintenance bay. It resonated through the metal deck plates, vibrating up through Elias's boots and into his bones. The air was thick, a stagnant blend of machine oil and the faint, acrid tang of ozone from the old wiring. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows that made the bay feel even more cavernous and forgotten. His datapad displayed the schematic for the redundant data storage unit, a relic of a bygone era of the Odyssey's construction. It was tucked away in this neglected corner, far from the sleek, vital systems that hummed with purpose. Elias considered that he too was tucked away, like this useless machine. He ran a hand over the cool metal casing, the surface worn smooth from years of neglect. His boots clicked softly against the metal floor as he moved to the access panel. The unit was supposed to be a backup, a failsafe for a failsafe, yet it hadn't been touched in cycles, probably decades. Why bother fixing a system nobody would ever need? Still, orders were orders. He sighed, the breath catching in his throat, the taste of recycled air metallic on his tongue. The maintenance report indicated a minor fault, a glitch in the data retrieval protocols. Nothing critical, nothing that would impact the ship's operation in the slightest. Elias opened the access panel, the hinges protesting with a drawn-out groan. Inside, the internal components were coated in a fine layer of dust, like a miniature forgotten city. He plugged his diagnostic cable into the interface port and watched as the datapad began to scan the system. The usual readouts flickered across the screen: temperature, power levels, and error codes, nothing unusual. Except for one thing: corrupted data packets. He zoomed in, tracing the errors back to a specific location within the storage matrix. It was as if someone had taken a hammer to the data itself. But this wasn't a malfunction. The corruption looked deliberate, methodical. A strange curiosity started to prick at him. Why would someone do this? and why to such an obscure system? He set about isolating the damaged sector, running a bypass protocol to circumvent the corrupted files. It was tedious, painstaking work, each step requiring him to manually redirect data streams. He was just about to complete the task when he noticed something unusual. A block of code, unlike the others. It was hidden beneath several layers of obfuscation, as if someone had gone to great lengths to conceal its existence. His fingers hovered over the datapad, a familiar itch of curiosity growing. What was this? A message? A secret? He felt a flutter of something, excitement maybe. It was a rare feeling these days working here. It was against regulations, bypassing the security protocols, but he found himself typing in the override codes without a second thought. The code decrypted slowly, the familiar binary changing into complex glyphs. The screen shimmered and then words appeared. It wasn't a sequence of technical jargon, but a poem. The language was old, archaic, yet Elias could still recognize the basic structure. He felt a chill spread through him as he read. Asterisk, the stars are cold. The void is deep. Asterisk, asterisk, and endless is this metal sleep. Asterisk, asterisk, I search for light. A spark. A sign. Asterisk, asterisk, in the hum and drone of this life of mine. Asterisk, asterisk, but only echoes meet my ear. Asterisk, asterisk, of dreams lost and swallowed here. Asterisk, Elias read it again, his heart beating a little faster. The words felt like a punch to the gut, a mirror held up to his own soul. He knew this feeling, this quiet desperation. He looked around the dim, forgotten maintenance bay, the endless metal walls feeling like the bars of a cage. This poem wasn't just a random sequence of data. It was a cry from the past, a message from someone who felt the same loneliness, the same crushing weight of the ship's monotonous routine. He wondered who wrote it, some forgotten engineer who had spent their days toiling in this very bay. A kinship stirred within him, a connection to someone he had never met, someone who had felt the same things he did. He carefully copied the poem to his personal datapad. He would keep it safe, a secret knowledge. He spent a few moments staring at his datapad, rereading the poem, letting the words sink into his consciousness. He ran a hand over the datapad, almost reverently. He was no longer just Elias, the mechanic, going through the motions. He was part of something more, part of a chain stretching across time. The malfunction on the unit was still minor, easily corrected, but his perspective had shifted. He completed the diagnostic protocols, repaired the damaged files, and closed the access panel. The system was operational now. The rhythmic clicking of the machinery continued, but it didn't sound as monotonous anymore. He took a deep breath, the metallic tang of the air still present, but now tinged with a sense of shared experience. He walked out of the maintenance bay, his steps feeling a little lighter, a little more purposeful. He noticed the engineers he passed as he made his way to the other maintenance sectors. He had never thought of them before, but he saw them now as perhaps also suffering in silence, perhaps also yearning for something more. He would never look at them the same way again. Chapter 6. The weight of routine. The fluorescent lights of Sector Gamma 7 hummed with the same monotonous drone as the hyperdrive couplings Elias was currently inspecting. The vast, cathedral-like space echoed with the rhythmic pulse of the ship's engines, a constant, vibrating pressure against his eardrums. His gloved hands moved with practiced ease, checking the torque on each bolt, his mind adrift in the familiar mechanical choreography. It was the mid-cycle of the ship's internal day, and for the past 8 of them it had been the same thing. Each movement was a precise replica of the last, each task a pixel in the larger mural of his routine. But today, the routine felt different. It wasn't the comfortable predictability of a well-worn path. It was a cage, each turn of the wrench, each click of the ratchet, a bar in his prison. The metallic tang of lubricants and coolants filled the air, a scent he'd grown accustomed to, yet now it felt cloying, suffocating. He glanced around the engine room, the same faces he saw every cycle. Rylan, his crew chief, stood across the bay, his thick arms crossed, his voice a low rumble as he barked orders to a younger mechanic about a recalibration. The same furrowed brow, the same impatient gestures. Elias recognized the tiredness in Ryland's eyes, the same weariness he felt himself, a shared weight of mechanical repetition. He saw the other mechanics, too, their faces drawn, their movements efficient but lacking in any hint of enthusiasm. It was as if they were all automatons, each one a cog in the massive machine of the Odyssey, each day indistinguishable from the last. A sense of disconnect washed over him. He was one of them, yet he felt apart, adrift in a sea of familiar faces but a stranger among his peers. The midday klaxon blared, signaling the start of the lunch break. Elias joined the flow of workers heading towards the shared dining facilities, the metallic clang of their boots on the grating walkways, a rhythmic accompaniment to their progress. The dining hall was a vast, sterile space filled with rows of tables. The air hung thick with the mingled scents of synthetic protein and recycled vegetables, the smell itself a testament to the ship's enclosed environment. Elias scanned the room. It was a sea of faces, each one as weary and indifferent as the next. They ate with the same mechanical precision as they worked, their eyes fixed on their trays, their conversations muted or non-existent. It was a depressing tableau of shared monotony. As he picked at his own meal, the uninspiring gray paste tasting of nothing in particular, he noticed a man at a nearby table staring blankly ahead. The man's eyes were vacant, his jaw slack, and it was then that Elias saw it. He saw his own reflection in those empty eyes. An unwelcome and unpleasant realization. He, too, was becoming one of them, an automaton drifting through life without purpose or joy. The end of his shift couldn't come soon enough. Back in his quarters, the small, sterile space amplified his sense of confinement. The walls seemed to press in on him, the synthetic lighting casting a harsh, unflattering glow. He tried to distract himself, pulling up some old maintenance logs on his personal datapad, hoping that the familiar technical jargon would provide some kind of respite. But the numbers and diagrams offered no solace, only further emphasizing the endless loop of his existence. The weight of the routine bore down upon him, heavy and suffocating. It was a crushing realization that the ship itself, which was once a marvel of human engineering, was now his prison. He found himself walking a different route to the engine room the next shift, lingering by a porthole overlooking the inky blackness of space, an attempt to disrupt the mundane. The stars were pinpricks of light in the void, distant and cold, and they didn't offer any comfort, but he found himself looking at them anyway, hoping for something, anything, to change. He spent a little extra time wiping down the hyperdrive couplings, cleaning even the parts that did not need cleaning, just to slow the clock, just to experience something different. But these little alterations did not help. They were just small diversions in the face of a great, overwhelming ennui. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring blankly at the wall, the repetitive hum of the ship, usually a constant companion, now a symbol of his entrapment. A question formed in his mind, a whisper in the void of his despair. What am I doing here? But the question hung there, unanswered by the cold metal walls of his prison, by the silent hum of the ship, by his own weary heart. Chapter 7. The silent observation. The access bay of the Odyssey's docking port was a cathedral of steel and shadow during the early cycles. Flickering fluorescent lights, embedded high in the vaulted ceiling, cast long, dancing silhouettes across the metal floor. The air hung heavy with the scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone, a familiar cocktail to Elias. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years in this environment. His boots clanked softly on the gritted metal as he methodically checked the docking clamps, his movements precise and economical. Each joint, each seal, each pressure sensor was inspected, a ritual performed countless times. The silence in the bay was usually broken only by the low hum of the ship's systems, a comforting drone that had become the background score to his existence. He was halfway through the eastern array when the alert klaxon blared, startling him slightly. A bright red light pulsed above the central docking port, and a mechanical voice cut through the usual hum. Incoming vessel, requesting docking at Port 3, designation, Supply Freighter Wanderer. It was an unusual event, the arrival of an unscheduled ship. Such occurrences were rare on their long, solitary voyage. A brief flurry of activity ensued as automated systems whirred to life. The massive docking arms shifted and realigned with a low groan. The pressurized seals hissed, preparing to engage. Elias was notified via his neural interface and directed to assist. He moved quickly, though without panic. The brief interlude of focused activity was a welcome break from the monotony. The Wanderer approached, a small, almost insignificant speck against the backdrop of the void, then grew steadily larger until it filled the view through the bay's reinforced viewing portal. The docking process was a dance of precision, automated arms extending and locking into place, then pressurized seals hissing as they engaged. Finally, with a soft thud, the airlock to the smaller ship opened. The first to disembark were a mix of faces, some bright-eyed and hesitant, clearly new migrants, clutching small bags and looking around in awe and a little fear. Others seemed more composed, their movements indicating a familiarity with space travel and its procedures. Elias observed them with detached curiosity, a silent witness to this small influx of new life onto the Odyssey. He noticed a young man with wide, hopeful eyes, and a woman, her face lined with worry, leading a small child by the hand. He saw technicians with tool belts and serious faces, and tradespeople with large packages and practical clothing. Each person had a story etched on their face, a story he might never know. Then he saw her. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her posture less tentative, more observant, almost assessing. Her features were striking, her eyes a deep, intense blue that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. She was not dressed as a technician or a tradesperson, nor did she look like a migrant. Her clothing was simple yet elegant, unlike anything he'd seen on the Odyssey. It was a subtle difference, but it was there. For a brief moment their eyes met, and in that fleeting connection, Elias felt a strange pang, a feeling that echoed something from his past. A forgotten emotion he could not quite grasp, a shadow of a memory of a woman from another life, from a time before the long voyage. The feeling was gone as quickly as it came, and she moved with the rest of the arrivals into the ship, lost in the crowd and swallowed by the corridor. The bay slowly settled back into its usual quiet, the mechanical noises receding to the familiar hum. The Wanderer was now attached to the Odyssey, an almost parasitic relationship. It would now be absorbed, its passengers just more cogs in the vast machine. Elias felt a sense of unease settle over him. He'd seen the hope in some of their eyes, the trepidation in others, and he knew what awaited them. The endless routine, the slow fade into the background of this metal world, the same that he felt now. He continued with his checks, the work feeling heavier now, the metal colder against his skin. He wondered how long it would take before those new faces lost their shine, before the weight of this endless voyage began to dim their lights, and how long before their individual stories were swallowed by the ship. He finished his checks and made his way back to his regular sector, the faces of the new arrivals, particularly hers, lingering in his mind, a reminder of all the life that had been and of all the life that would never be. He felt the familiar pang of longing, a yearning for something more, something different than this endless cycle within the ship's metal belly. The hope and trepidation in their eyes were like a mirror to a long-gone version of himself, and he wondered how long before they too would be absorbed by the routine. Chapter 8. Accepting the hum, the fluorescent lights of the maintenance bay flickered, a weak counterpoint to the powerful, steady thrum of the Odyssey. Elias moved through his pre-shift checklist with a practiced ease, his hands navigating the familiar consoles and panels. The hum of the ship, once a source of subtle agitation, now felt different. It was still there, an ever-present vibration that permeated the metal deck plates and resonated in his bones, but this morning it carried a new quality, a sense of unwavering purpose. He wasn't fighting it anymore, he was listening. Today, instead of moving directly to the diagnostics bay, he paused by the primary coolant pumps, his hand hovering over the warm casing. He usually just glanced at the gauges, noting the readings, but this time he allowed himself a moment to simply feel the machine, its smooth metal and the rhythmic pulsing within. The pumps pushed the coolant through the vast circulatory system of the ship, a tireless, vital task. He saw not just machinery but a beating heart, a necessary organ in the body of this metal leviathan. It was a small shift, a few extra seconds, but it marked a quiet change in his perception. He continued his rounds, his steps taking him down different corridors, passages he usually avoided because they were slightly less efficient. It wasn't a conscious decision to deviate, more like a gentle curiosity pulling him along new paths. He found himself lingering longer in the power conduit nexus, watching the intricate dance of the energy flows, the delicate balance that held everything together. It was like looking at a map of the ship's vital systems, a living circuit board woven through the entire structure. Later, while replacing a faulty relay in the port-side ventilation system, he studied the old component in his hand, the delicate wiring and the carefully molded plastic. He realized with a clarity he hadn't experienced before that each piece, every tiny gear and microchip, was essential. He, too, was a part of this vast interconnectedness, a small but necessary cog in the intricate machinery of the Odyssey. His role wasn't glamorous or celebrated, but it was crucial. The shift ended and he followed his routine, locking down the maintenance bay, clocking out, the familiar digital interface blinking its cold confirmation. There was no yearning for something different, no desperate scramble to escape his duties. The acceptance, like the ship's hum, just was. His small quarters were as Spartan as ever, the gray metal walls reflecting the dim light. He ate his tasteless nutrient paste, and this time, instead of feeling the usual wave of resignation, it was simply sustenance. He cleaned his tools, placing each in its assigned spot, finding a strange sense of satisfaction in the order he was creating. It was a small, personal ritual, a way to anchor himself in the routine. He walked to the observation port on Deck 3, a wide pane of reinforced crystal offering a view into the inky blackness of space. The stars, countless pinpricks of light scattered across the void, were familiar, and yet they looked different tonight. It wasn't a yearning for them, a desperate desire to escape to their distant shores. He understood that his place was here, on the Odyssey, and that was okay. He was part of this journey, this endless, silent voyage through the galaxy. The ship hummed around him, a constant companion, and he felt himself humming in tune. He turned away from the window and walked back to his quarters. The steady, rhythmic pulse of the ship was no longer a cage, but a cradle. He lay on his bunk, his mind at ease. He closed his eyes, the vibrations resonating deep within him, and he slipped into a peaceful sleep, ready to greet the same routine tomorrow. He was a part of it all, a functional cog in the grand machine, and he was finally at peace.